It's a miserable rainy day, not the sort of day where we want to be leaving Erica's doors open and traipsing in and out, so we're just going to see if we can do a couple of indoor jobs today, one of which is applying a bit of sound deadening and the other is starting the insulation. On the subject of sound deadening, I find myself unconvinced as to how necessary it is in a vehicle as small as this that hasn't got big spans of metal on the panels, so you haven't got the vibrations and noise of those panels moving as you drive along. Those panels at the back, for example, are really quite taut. The door, there is a little bit more noise when you bang on it, but not a lot. We're going to just put a little pad or two of sound deadening material on that top panel. Now the ceiling, theoretically, we don't need anything because it's got these ribs that holds it taut, but it is a big expanse of loose metal, and as Mick's about to demonstrate, there's quite a ring to that. So we're going to chuck a couple of these sheets up there as well and see if it makes any difference. We've been driving around for a week or so now without any insulation or the header liner, etc. On the roof, on the walls, and the sound when we're driving, it's quite loud, but it's not intolerable, and clearly it will reduce as we start insulating and filling the space. So I don't think that the sound deadening is critical in any way, but we thought we may as well put some in so that we don't in the future think we should have done that. And whilst Mick's doing that, I'm going to put some insulation in the tailgate. Took the liner off the tailgate the other day and discovered that actually the entire assembly is made of plastic. So it's not quite such an issue as the side panels in terms of the risk of condensation and what that might do to the vehicle. However, obviously from the point of view of heat escaping, we still want some insulation in there. So I'm going to be using this recycled plastic bottle loft insulation to fill those spaces, and then that trim can go back on, which will be another item out of our dining room, which will be a bonus. And the test, does it make a difference? A little bit, not a lot. I remain unconvinced by the need for it. Two more pieces of deadening material in the driver's side rear door, but none on the passenger side yet, so let's have another ringing experiment. A lot deader, really noticeably deader on the side that has got the material in. Maybe I will become some sort of a convert in due course. I've finished insulating the tailgate as best I can, managed to manoeuvre my hand into some rather awkward spaces, including across the top there on those horizontals, managed to fill both of those all the way to the edges. The verticals down the sides, took me a while to realise I could actually get into those. The diagonals I could only get in top and bottom, so there's a gap in the middle where I just couldn't manoeuvre the material. You can clearly see where I have put the big panels of insulation, and then there's one big gap at the bottom where there is no access to the inside to put any insulation at all, so that remains uninsulated. We just had a bit of a discussion as to whether we need to put any sort of a vapour barrier on there, bearing in mind that that is plastic insulation inside a completely plastic assembly. So even if any moisture did get in and couldn't get out, it's not going to cause any rot. We decided no, we're just going to put the fascia panel back on and call the job done. We rounded off the day by stuffing insulation into some of the places where we knew we wouldn't need access the following day when we intended to run cables for the lights, water pump and sockets. This is a job, incidentally, where it's beneficial if you have small hands, thin arms and flexible joints, as some of the places we needed to put the insulation weren't very accessible. Just here was the electro reel switch, and we had thought that maybe we'd leave that in place so that we could just reuse the wires that were already run for some floor level lighting at the front. But when I put the insulation in yesterday, it became apparent it was going to be a lot easier if I removed those wires, and as I had them disconnected I popped the switch out and we stripped the wires back. We managed to strip the wires back to the top left of the tailgate, where I expected all four of the wires to go back towards the engine. and what we found was that actually one of those wires, it took quite a bit of feeling around to work this out, actually went into the tailgate. Put a little bit of thought into that, and the only conclusion we could reach was that this switch only made the electro reels live when the tailgate was open, which makes sense that you would only want to be able to load a wheelchair when the tailgate's open, and you want those anchor points to be switched off once the tailgate is shut. So I've just had my multimeter out and just tested a few things and confirmed that, yep, that is indeed the case. So as wired, that would have been no good to us for some floor level lighting, but moreover, it's just not worth having all that run of 4 cables running through Erica for something that we really don't need. So those 4 wires are going to come out. Having stripped out those wires from the electro reel switch this morning, I've left them hanging behind the driver's seat, and I've just been having adventures working out how to release this pillar, which is the seatbelt pillar for the driver's seat, to get at the wires that are tucked behind it. That's involved having to remove the cover from the handbrake, and all of the wires are running up there behind the header liner and up and over the top. So I'm just trying to get out all the ones we don't need. That was quite a bit of cable removed. Now to put some more in different places. But what I'm about to do is take this flexible piece of plastic that I've already used this morning to pull some insulation through that void there. I'm going to push it down through this pillar, down to the bottom, and use that to pull 2 wires through. So first things first, let's see if I can get this through this hole and to come out down at the bottom. I have just run a wire up this pillar. It comes out here where I've put some trunking to protect it. I'm about to come across the ceiling and push it into this hole here. But just a little point of note that the original vehicle manufacturer, of course, used some protection wherever a wire goes into the body of the vehicle to stop any wires chafing. We've this morning stripped out a pile of wires. These are 2 that are left, they go to the step, and the company that did the alterations to the vehicle to make it an NHS patient transfer wheelchair accessible vehicle didn't use anything to protect wires. This wire for the pump now comes out of a piece of ducting there. I've just very loosely cable tied it on across the ceiling just to hold it in place for now, through another piece of ducting down, and it comes out there. I've left what I believe to be a reasonable margin for error in terms of getting it to the pump and getting the connection. I bought 3 metres more wire than I need so that I don't need to cut anything short. That's enough at the moment to come all the way out the cupboard, so should be plenty to wire up the pump. We now have a neat coil of wire just there, which is for the 12-volt socket that's going in the kitchen. We've got another little coil of wire there for the water pump, and both of those originate up on the other side of the vehicle, and they're going to run down there across the back of the sofa to the electrical box. Yes, there is a lot of stuff on the floor at the moment. We have incidentally over-specced the wires. The lights we're using 1.5mm, the 12-volt socket we're using 2.5mm. That's Mick just cleaning the floor before he puts any tape on it. And the reason we're over-speccing it is because even though this is a very small vehicle, we've got 6 metre cable runs, so taking into account the voltage loss over that distance, we've gone up a size on the cable. I've just run this wire that goes up through that pillar, up to the top, and comes out a loop there that is going to go to a light before it continues to the rear lights. And that's a job that would have been a whole lot easier if we'd done it this morning when we had that trim off, at which point we decided we weren't going to route it that way. Before I decided that actually it had to be routed that way. And whilst I've been doing that, Mick's been doing some bizarre sort of a 3D
origami.
3D origami jigsaw at the back, going round the rather awkward shape of the wheel arch with silver foil. We're going to have in front of that some insulation, which may seem the wrong way round, but there is method in our madness to have the silver foil behind the insulation in this position. And with that, I now have the wires run for the light at the front, 2 lights at the rear, the water pump and the 12-volt socket in the kitchen. There'll also be a USB socket that's on the front of the sofa, but that's right next to the battery, so I don't need to run a wire for that just yet. So with the wires run, we're now in a position to do more of the insulation. I used the same method for filling all of the more inaccessible bits, which involved feeding a piece of flexible plastic via one of the small holes at one end of the void, taping a piece of insulation that I'd already cut to size onto that plastic, then pulling with the plastic from one end whilst pushing with my hand for the other. It turned out to be an easy way to get these voids filled. Origami number 1 is done. Mick has just spent quite a long while perfecting, and he has done it very well, the wrapping of that wheel arch. You'll notice there's a bit of a knobble on top of that wheel arch, which was a particularly interesting piece to go around. I'll show you on the other side of the vehicle. It's this point here, which is welded on at various places, and the only reason we believe that that piece is there is because there was a seatbelt mounting point there from back when this was a 9-seater vehicle. We don't think there's any structural purpose to that, so we did consider angle grinding it off, but we went for the route of least resistance, not having to deal with rough edges, and left it on, which means that Mick has had to have great fun and games perfecting his origami. When we bought Erica, the inside of her doors looked like that with door cards on. We then stripped those out, giving us an empty void, which we've then filled with insulation. We've also filled all of the, well, everywhere you can stuff insulation and we have access, we have stuffed insulation, even the places where it was really quite tricky to get some. Once we'd done that, we covered it over with a vapour barrier. We have used silver foil. There's actually no benefit to using the silver on here. It's just that it's a convenient substance with a bit of strength to it to give the vapour barrier. Taped it all on with the silver tape all the way round. And once we'd done that, we put the card back on. Ignore the damage on that one. It's going to be covered over with furniture, so it didn't seem worth cutting a new one. And in the front, back to this first door, that is actually the finished product. Inside of that door, including up in the sides of the windows, that is stuffed with insulation now, covered with silver foil, taped around, and then the door card is back on. So now the only parts of the van that aren't insulated are the roof. We have that insulation, we just need to fit it, and the header liner in the cab. And having had great discussions about that yesterday, the end result is it's just too difficult. So for the moment, we're going to just completely ignore it, leave it uninsulated, unsealed, and see what happens. We finished this phase of the insulation by cutting the boards for the roof, but before fitting them, the solar panel needed to be fitted and the wiring run through the roof, and that was a job for another day. Whilst Mick's doing that, I'm going to make a start on the insulation with the back tailgate, as opposed to any other sort of tailgate. With that, I now have the wire installed for the light at the front, 2 lights at the back, for the 12-volt socket in the kitchen, and for the water pump.